Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if ANBU Captain Naruto secretly dating Mikoto and married her, part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Look Ka-chan. I got an Aniki too now. Karen yelled with the usual excitement of a child. It was quite amazing really. The kid seemed to adapt to his presence quickly, but Akari on the other hand, despite being polite and friendly, was also obviously wary of him and on guard the entire time they had been walking. Akari shook her head at the child's naivety and selfishness. As she opened her mouth to speak, she abruptly stopped herself as something felt wrong. Naruto-san, something is coming from the direction of the village. She whispered, her voice breaking and her body shivering with horror. They had to be coming here to take her back. Why else would they have so many numbers with them? Naruto's eyes widened before narrowing dangerously. The entire atmosphere around them changed and the blonde stepped up in front of them as he looked in the direction of the village. Akari-san. He calmly spoke as he started to feel the increasing number of chakra signatures heading their way at high speeds. Why yes. She stuttered and pulled her child to her, looking at the back of the lone male Uzumaki present. Sighing, Naruto reached up and grabbed the hilt of his blade sticking up from under his cloak and grasped it tightly. Take Karen and run to the east. If you keep going east you'll get closer and closer to High no Kuni. Should I be unable to join you before you get to the border, tell them you're with Uzumaki Naruto returning from S-rank political matters in Kusa. You shall be kept there in safe surroundings until your statements are either confirmed by myself or Hokage-sama. What about you? There's a lot of people coming this way. Akari whispered the last part hurriedly, her arms clutching around Karen as the child looked beyond terrified. As if she too was realizing the danger ahead. Naruto shook his head and sighs. To her it might seem like many, but to him, it wasn't quite that horrifying. Didn't stop him from getting pissed tough. I'll be right behind you. Just run to the east. Quickly. East. Akari in the heat of the moment was unable to find her sense of direction, looking around slowly. Naruto facepalmed slightly, and pointed into the sky. See the sun? It's going down, which means you run like hell in that direction. He yelled at the top of his lungs and threw his hand toward the direction he meant while Akari felt like punching herself in the face. Nodding gratefully at him, she scooped her kid up in her arms and started running as fast as her weak and bruised body could carry her. Naruto sighed and turned around again. He was about to reach back up for his sword when a presence leapt out of the woods and landed a few yards away from him. The person that had appeared made him scowl. Ryujin Dono, what do I owe the pleasure? Naruto grunted sarcastically as the middle-aged man stood up with his black locks swaying around in the air. While spitting on the ground between them, Ryujin reached down and placed a hand on a sword he was now carrying by his hip. Cut the crap, brat. Where's the Uzumaki? He demanded while grasping his hand firmly around the handle. He started pulling the blade out of its sheath, revealing a double-edged longsword. This is a bad idea. Naruto sighed and looked around at the woods while keeping his guard up. Around 5 more men were hiding in the trees and bushes around them. Judging from the chakra level they were displaying at the current moment, he'd say there were about Chunin level in strength. Agreed, so hand the Uzumaki over and I'll make sure you'll get painlessly executed. Ryujin agreed with a shrug as he held his sword down along his side. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at that before his gaze turned completely serious with his eyes narrowed dangerously. His sharp blue piercing gaze digging into the mind and soul of the Kusa leader as he smirked devilishly, and almost sadistically. No, what I mean is, the blood of your men will be on your hands, not mine. Ryujin's eyes widened slightly as the words left the blonde's mouth. As he was about to shout out an order for the attack, Naruto had vanished from view. Appearing midair while turning upside down with his head facing toward the ground, Naruto spun around while flipping kunai in between his fingers. Closing his eyes, Naruto allowed his senses to take over as he took a deep breath. There are 5 opponents, and I have 10 kunai. They are hiding, but it doesn't matter. Naruto snapped his eyes open with a grin at that. Twisting and turning around, he started throwing the kunai through the air all around him. As the audible sound of metal clashing echoed throughout the forest, the first kunai Naruto had thrown was hit by the last ones he threw. Landing in a crouched position on the ground, Naruto mentally counted down from 10. As he got to 1, 3 forms fell out of the trees and onto the ground, and the last 2 bodies of Ryujin's shinobi fell face forward out of the bushes with a kunai in their respective neck. Seems like I overestimated them. I thought they were Chunin level in strength, but without the ability to even dodge or deflect a kunai. I've changed my mind and now I'm more thinking academy student. Naruto smirked as the leader of Kusa gritted his teeth so tightly together that it felt like they would crack. You'll pay for that, the man shouted in absolute blinding anger. Naruto scoffed at that and pointed a finger toward him. You were the one who attacked me. Their blood is on your hands, not mine. You stole my property, was the response he got, which made Naruto's usually bright blue eyes darken in color. Scowling angrily, Naruto yelled, "They are not your property. They are living people with emotions and feelings. Not some emotionless property of your belonging. That's rich coming from you. You're a shinobi. You're a weapon, a tool for your cage." Ryujin retorted. Snorting at that answer, Naruto crossed his arms over his chest. I chose that. I decided I wanted to be a shinobi. I decided I wanted to be of use to my village and nation. They didn't decide to become residents of a martyr. Akari didn't choose to become a chew toy. You decided that in exchange for letting her survive. I've had enough of you. The leader of Kusa shook his head as he swirled his blade around in his grasp before charging forward. Rearing his blade back, he sliced toward the blonde that leapt back and pulled his blade out and swirled around in place, clashing his blade into Ryujin's. And you. Naruto hissed before pushing his blade into Ryujin's, creating a small space for him to charge into an offense. Their blades clashed and slammed together over and over. Sparks of the metals fighting each other flew around them as Naruto went low and swept at Ryujin's legs with his feet. The man noticed in time and backflipped out of the way while pushing his sword back into his sheath. Ryujin landed a few yards back and flipped through hand seals. The blonde was young but quite formidable with a sword. Even in the offense, he had a great defense. Even if he was confident he would win, he didn't have the time to clash with the brat. His property was getting away. Hidden grass secret technique. Grass serpent. Ryujin called out as he slammed his palms together. The grass around him grew rapidly in size before swirling around each other to form a large serpent with fangs and yellow glowing eyes. Naruto's eyes widened at the sight, mentally noting how much this technique seemed to remind him of what he had heard of the Shadaime Hokage's Mokuden. Cursing at himself for not having learned enough Kaden ninjutsu to fight this, Naruto flipped through the hand seals to the only fire attack Itachi had managed to teach him so far. Fire is not my primary element, but I hope it'll suffice. The blonde groaned as he flipped into the air while spinning around. As he finished his last seal, ending on the tiger seal, he sweated as he saw the serpent flying up at him. Begging mentally for this to be enough, he took a deep breath, his chest swelling before he opened his mouth and mentally called, "Fire release, Great Fireball Jutsu," exhaling a large stream of fire that formed into a huge burning globe of fire that crashed right into the heads of the serpent nearing his airborne body. The orb of fire crashed into the grass and immediately started to fight the hostile technique, burning away at the grass. The embers and ashes of the grass started to fly around him. Much to his pleasure, his technique won the battle and continued down toward the leader of Kusa that had to leap into the air to dodge the blazing globe. Deciding now was a good time to use something from more familiar to him, Naruto flipped through hand seals again as he threw his palms forward, lightning release, false darkness. Gritting his teeth as he channeled his chakra into lightning that traveled across his palms, he shot it from his palms in shapes of dark blue spears roaring toward Ryujin. Growling at the boy that was managing to push him, Ryujin thrust his palm toward a tree as his hand shot a long rope of intervened grass out of his palm toward to pull him out of harm's way. Such a damn peasant! Ryujin roared in anger and frustration, pulling out what seemed to be endless kunai and shuriken he threw in the blonde's direction. Naruto scoffed at the sight and pulled his blade out again and started to easily deflect the incoming projectiles. As the last kunai was near him, he calculated its flight route and stabbed the tip of his sword into the hole at the bottom of the handle and swirled around before he hurling the kunai back at the enemy. Ryujin was slightly taken back by the move and felt his shoulders slit open by the kunai grazing through his clothes and skin. Grasping the cut tightly with his palm, his veins throbbed as he growled angrily. Landing on the ground again, Naruto channeled lightning around his body to increase his strength and momentum drastically. Launching himself off the ground, he flew forward and first threw his sword at Ryujin, who desperately grasped his own and dragged it out of the sheath to block the blade with sparks flying around the clashing metals. Having created his intended opening, Naruto flew in close and grabbed the man's wrist to lock the blade in place, kneeing him in the gut and doubling him over. Then, Naruto quickly reared his fist into position to send a devastating uppercut into the man's chin, punching up into the man's face as hard as he could. Using this moment to pull the sword out of the man's grasp, Naruto grabbed his own airborne blade and went for a dual-wielded cut down that Ryujin, despite his disorientation, managed to leap away from with blood leaking out of the corner of his mouth. Deciding enough was enough, Ryujin flipped his hands into a half-ram seal and mentally called out, "Hidden Grass Secret Technique, Poison Cloud Mist." With his cheek swelling, he expelled a dark green mist flying at blinding speeds out of his mouth toward Naruto, whose eyes widened as he brought his arms wielding the two blades to shield his face. Coughing wildly, Naruto leapt as fast as he could backward and out of the smoke cloud, coughing into his sleeve as he felt his vision start to blur, and his muscles starting to go numb. Shit! A cloud of poison mist just as toxic as the purple python's venom. You shouldn't even be standing, but I guess that it wasn't just the two females that were formidable. Uzumaki. Ryujin roared as he seemingly appeared out of nowhere and punched the blonde in the side of his face, sending him crashing into the ground and rolling across the forest floor. I couldn't even see him, Naruto cursed, mentally thanking his lineage and tenant for already fighting the poison before it became too much for him to even stand. Noticing movement to his right, Naruto lifted his palm to block an incoming fist but gaped with salvia flying from his mouth as a kick was planted firmly in his gut. Unable to fly back from the grip on his fist, Naruto lifted his head to growl but was instead punched on top of his head and sent flying face first into the ground. Ryujin took this chance to grab a kunai and thrust down toward the blonde's neck, but the sound of metal getting drawn made Naruto's eyes widen. Flying to his knees, Naruto grabbed the man's wrist and used all the strength he could gather in his poisoned state to kick the side of the man's knee, bringing him down kneeling so he could punch him right in the nose, sending him falling backward with a yelp. You damn brat! Ryujin roared and flew up to punch Naruto's face as hard as he could, sending the blonde's head flying backward with blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. Not stopping there, Ryujin grabbed the blonde's hair and tried to stab him in the throat with the kunai from before. Naruto looked on with widened eyes as he brought up his hand to block it again, but the action was slightly too late. Instead of blocking the wrist, he blocked the blade with his palm. The blade stabbing right through it. Are you the dumbest person alive? Ryujin taunted while Naruto just smirked tiredly while groaning in pain. Lightning release. Grasping his fingers as hard as he could around the kunai in Ryujin's hand, he groggily formed a hand seal with his free hand and started to emit as much lightning he could from his pierced hand, electromagnetic murder. The metal instantly directed it into Ryujin's hand and arm as Naruto held him in place as he proceeded to fry the man's flesh. As he started to feel the effect of the poisons getting weaker and weaker until the point he barely noticed it, he mentally scowled and thanked the Kyuubi for breaking down the poison this fast. Pulling his palm backward to release it from the kunai, Naruto hissed in pain as blood run down his hand and arm from his wrist. Ryujin, who was too busy cradling his arm in pain, didn't get time to notice Naruto swirling up to his feet and kicking him straight in the face, sending him propelling back into a tree. Panting heavily, Naruto waltzed over and grabbed his sword and placed it in its sheath before grabbing the hilt of Ryujin's sword that he had snatched from his grasp earlier. He could still feel the effect of the poisons in his systems, his vision and senses were getting better, but he still had a hard time feeling his legs. Bringing up the sword he had stolen, he panted harshly while starting to slowly walk over toward Ryujin, whose arm was still smoking from the burns that had burnt his sleeve to a crisp along with his skin. Spotting Naruto coming closer, he grabbed a kunai and charged forward, clashing his blade into the sword of the still poisoned Uzumaki, who deflected it with the longsword. Slamming the kunai out of the man's grasp, Naruto kicked him the gut and grabbed his hair before placing the tip of the blade at the man's throat. It's over. Ryujin looked on in horror as he felt the defeat. He had been bested by a brat. A Konoha lapdog. How could it have come to this? He didn't get more time to speculate before he was hit in the neck by the hilt of his own sword, instantly knocking him out cold. Naruto panted heavily and looked at the blade. Chuckling tiredly, he sighed, spoils of war. He chuckled and reached down to grasp the sheath Ryujin had been wearing, placing it around his waist to carry the sword by his hip before fishing a roll of bandages out of his shuriken pouch. As he started to wrap his arm up, his sweat dropped a bit. I guess Itachi was right. Going easy on your opponent is a bad thing. I almost lost. Ka-chan. My feet hurt. The young redhead whined softly up at her mom as the two Uzumaki ran side by side over one of the last bridges there were before they'd get to the Konoha outpost, their hands tightly clasped together. Akari panted hard as she reached down to pull her kid up into her weakening grasp again. She hadn't felt the presence of the incoming enemy in a while, but at the same time, she hadn't felt Naruto's either. We're almost there. Akari panted and panted hard as she stopped at the end of the bridge to catch her breath. She couldn't sense any danger, so she put her daughter down again to rest. Her face was getting pale, and her clothes drenched in sweat. Ka-chan, are you okay? Karen asked worriedly as Akari smiled weakly and held onto the railing of the bridge, her vision starting to go slightly blurry. Nodding tiredly, Akari's knees started to shake as she whispered through panting breaths, "Why yes dear, Ka-chan is okay." She barely got to finish before her eyes went dark and she slumped down against the bridge. Ka-chan. Karen screamed horrified and slumped down beside her mom, shaking her limp form wildly with a terrified expression covering her face, tears welling up in the corners of her eyes before running down her cheeks. Naruto, who had been running all he could to catch up with the two, got to the bridge about 10 minutes later. Racing over the bridge as he ran as fast as he could, his legs still feeling wobbly from the poison, he almost fell as he noticed Akari's form collapsed on the bridge with her daughter over her. Crouching down, the blonde panted heavily and got down beside Karen and asked hurriedly with wide eyes, "Karen, what happened?" He almost shouted as the small girl snapped her head up to look up at him as she hugged her mom's arm. Aniki. Ka-chan just fell over. She said she was okay, the girl sobbed as she clung to her. Naruto mentally felt relieved. There hadn't been an attack. Now wasn't a time to rest though. Leaning over her, he quickly placed 2 fingers at her throat and exhaled slowly and relieved that there still was a pulse. Your mother is alive, but this doesn't look like normal fatigue. I'm no medic, but the marks on her arms are having an odd color too. Naruto whispered gently and held the woman's arm in his grasp. The bite marks were changing into a more purple or blue color. Will she be okay? Karen stuttered and looked up at him with teary eyes. Naruto bit his lips slightly and looked a bit guilty. He honestly didn't know. He didn't even dare to move her in this state. He couldn't tell if it was safe to move with her all the way to Konoha. And could Konoha even help with this? It wasn't a normal sick state, it looked like some intense chakra poisoning. Lifting Akari into his arms, Naruto walked with her and Karen in tow under a tree to place her down in the shadows. Pulling his cloak off to reveal his sword sheath that had been covered, he rolled the piece of clothing together to form a makeshift pillow to place under her head. Reaching into his shuriken pouch, he pulled out some bandages and drenched them in some cold water and placed on her forehead. After about 10 minutes of waiting, Naruto looked on at the still-out mother with her daughter quietly running her small hand through her hair. Sighing softly to himself, Naruto walked out behind a tree and bit his thumb, placing his hand on the ground as he quietly mumbled, summoning jutsu. A small cloud of smoke popped into existence, and as it cleared, a small orange toad appeared before him. Yo bro, what's poppin'? Tone it down, Gamakichi, this is not the time for cheerfulness. Naruto sighed, making the small toad raise a brow at him amused. That's oddly dull of you. Naruto shook his head and sighed again while handing the toad a small note. Sorry for being so abrupt this time, but there is a life on the line here. Give this to the Hokage and tell him I'm requesting the location of her. Who is her? Gamakichi asked, confused. Naruto shushed him and waved his hand. Oji-san will know who I'm talking about. Please, just be on your way. Fine, but there better be snacks the next time. The forests between Konoha and Kusa. Dusk finally arrived as the woods darkened around them. Naruto had moved them to a more secure location and started a fire, along with creating about 20 clones to create a perimeter of security as they hid about the forest. They would have to get out of there soon. It was only a matter of time before Ryujin would have the woods swept for their presence, and he needed her location to treat Akari. While Naruto loved his village, the medical scene had taken a turn for the worse after the slug Sanin, Senju Tsunade, had left the village in sorrow. Opening his eyes that he had been resting for a few minutes, he looked down beside him to see Akari still out cold, looking somewhat better but still in a bad shape. Her fever was going down, but the bite marks on her arms kept getting a worse and worse appearance. Looking down beside her, he smiled softly at the sight of Karen tucking her small form up against her mother's side, under her arm. Hearing a soft sound from the bushes in beside them, the blonde looked over with a raised brow to see Gamakichi, who had finally returned. Standing up on his feet, Naruto quietly walked in between the bushes and crouched down in front of the toad. What do you have for me, buddy? He asked in a quiet tone to make sure he didn't wake the others up by accident. Gamakichi held up a sealed scroll with a proud grin. Location delivered as requested, bro. He responded as Naruto nodded gratefully and grabbed the scroll. Upon unsealing and rolling it out, he mentally sighed in relief. The location was near Kuni, the lands of hot springs, tourist attractions, and gambling. No wonder she was over there, the nightlife was probably quite entertaining. Kuni was about as far away as Konoha was from this location, and while she wasn't out of the country, she was in one of the few cities that had a lot of influences from its neighbor. Was that all, bro? Gamakichi yawned, making Naruto chuckle as he nodded gratefully toward his summon. Yes, Gamakichi, thanks for the help. Naruto thanked him, but the toad just waved him off before disappearing in a cloud of smoke, returning back home. Waltzing back into camp, Naruto sighed softly. He didn't want to stay in hostile territory longer than he needed to, but Akari was sick and every minute could be important. He had already waited longer than he wanted to. Crouching down, Naruto pulled the blade off his back and sealed it into a scroll that he tucked away into his shuriken pouch. He'd have to carry them both, and the sword would be in the way. Gently shaking Karen's shoulder, he smiled apologetically at her as he held a finger up to his mouth, signaling her to be quiet. Karen yawned as she sat up tiredly, looking confused up at the blonde Uzumaki who was putting the fire out. Aniki, it's still dark. I know, I'm sorry. I've gotten the location I need, and I don't want to waste any more time. We'll travel by night, Naruto explained softly and turned around with his back toward her, signaling for her to get on. Karen blushed slightly and looked a bit uncertain. After taking a deep breath, she swung her smaller arms around the blonde's neck and climbed onto his back, holding her body in place by wrapping her legs around onto his stomach. Comfortable? Naruto asked quietly as he crouched down beside Akari and started to seal away his cloak that he had been letting her borrow as a pillow. No, Karen pouted at him. Yeah, I know, Naruto chuckled a bit amused before scooping Akari up in his arms again. The woman was so light that it really made him quite uncomfortable. She needed a proper meal soon. Time was ticking, they had to leave now. Hang on tight, Karen, it's going to be a long trip, Naruto warned before jumping off the ground and into the woods, using the branches of the trees to increase his momentum as they disappeared into the night, the clones he had created traveling along with them in the shadows, guarding them against any attack that could come. As the sunrise started to show, Naruto started to slow down as the noise of a city started to get closer to his ears. Landing on the last branch of the forest, he started to look over his destination. A gambling hub for travelers going to and from between the Hai no Kuni and Yu no Kuni. The village was indeed a nice sight. It was filled with high-class luxury gambling halls and hotels. Placing Akari down for a second on the branch, he heard Karen yawn softly on his shoulder with her eyes opening and closing from sleepiness. Reaching into his pocket, he looked at the address that the Hokage had gotten him. Luckily for him, he had been here before on a mission and had stayed at the exact same address, to, practice his luck at gambling while he had some time to kill. Sighing, he pocketed the note again and lifted the woman up again before using the shunshin to get there faster whilst avoiding prying eyes. Landing at the front entrance, Naruto sneaked in past the lady at the front desk and started to slowly make his way up the stairs. Luckily for him, there was no one in the hallway to give him funny looks. Slowly walking down the hallway, looking at all the numbers on the doors, he got to the end and finally got the number he was looking for. B213, he whispered and crouched down to let Karen get off his back, which she hurriedly did. Yawning loudly, she stretched with a sleepy look, black bags under her eyes as she could barely keep herself awake. Can you knock for me? Naruto asked with a smile, to which Karen just nodded without saying a word before knocking a few times on the door as they heard shifting on the other side of the door. A loud yell of frustration was heard from within the room, making Karen seek out a hiding spot behind Naruto's legs. Naruto's sweat dropped at that and watched the door with interest. I swear to God I'll skin alive whoever dares wake me up so early in the morning. Came a loud roar from within, as the door was flung open to reveal a fair-skinned woman with brown eyes and straight blonde hair. She was an above-average height and had noticeably large. She stopped at the door's opening for a moment and narrowed her eyes before smirking with a small grin. Without saying a word to him, she left the door open and walked back in. Shizune. Blondie is here. And he is carrying a woman with him. She shouted without a care in the world. What are you talking about, Tsunade-sama? Came a tired groan from within a few seconds after. Naruto's sweat dropped more at that and heard more footsteps coming as a teen a bit taller than him with shoulder-length black hair, and onyx eyes came into the doorframe. Naruto-kun. What a pleasant surprise. What do we owe the pleasure? And, why are you carrying a red-headed woman? Naruto frowned at that and motioned with his head down at the kid behind his legs. Shizune looked down curiously and her eyes widened at the sight of a young red-headed girl hiding behind the blonde's legs. I need your assistance. This woman is Akari Uzumaki, and this young one is Karen Uzumaki, her daughter. I was on a mission to Kusa to retrieve these two from an abusive environment, but Akari passed out and have been out cold for what I would guess is 10 to 12 hours. It looks serious, and I don't think Konoha's hospitals have what it takes, so I came here. Please help me, Naruto whispered, looking into the older girl's eyes with a rare pleading look. Shizune opened her mouth to answer when the slug Sanin yelled from within the room, bring her in here and lay her on the bed and I'll take a look, but you know the deal, Blondie. Naruto smiled with relief and hurriedly got inside with Karen in tow. Getting to the bed, Naruto laid Akari down and placed a pillow under her head. Tsunade yawned and stretched with a groan as she spotted the kind behind Naruto's legs. Since when did you become a dad? Naruto started coughing wildly as he choked on his own spit, and no. As I said to Shizune-chan, this is Karen Uzumaki, she is the daughter of Akari here. Naruto said as he pointed between the two female Uzumakis with his index finger. Calm down, Gaki, I'm just teasing you. Tsunade roared with laughter as she walked over to the woman on the bed. She was hiding her interest with humor, but she had been willing to help ever since he mentioned who he had with him. It was no secret that her grandmother was Mito Uzumaki, and she had been friendly with Kushina Uzumaki before she passed. She had thought Naruto was the only one left, but here he was, dragging two more to her doorstep. Shizune, take a look at the girl. If she is from the same place she might be sick too, Tsunade ordered, and Shizune quickly nodded and moved toward the young girl who kept hiding behind the blonde. Naruto patted the top of her head, slightly startling her as she looked up at him. It's okay, Karen, these people are friends. Tsunade over there has Uzumaki blood too, her grandmother was an Uzumaki. You can trust them, they'll make your mother better in no time. Karen, still uncertain, slowly made her way out from her hiding place, looking up at the dark-haired woman who slowly extended a hand down to her, which she looked up at Naruto before grabbing. We'll do what we can, but in the meantime, you're going to take a shower, Blondie. You stink. Tsunade snorted while pulling Akari's sleeves up with a horrified look. Those marks on her arms were beyond disgusting to look at. Where had Naruto found her again? Naruto pouted at that and started to walk toward the bathroom. Yeah, you try fighting the leader of Kusa without starting to sweat. As he was walking past Shizune, who had placed Karen on a chair, the older girl looked down at his arm that was swaying by his side as he walked. Standing up, she grabbed his wrist, making him look at her funnily. What? He asked, confused, as she pulled the hand covered in bloody bandages up to her face. You're injured, she states simply and starts to unroll poorly done bandage off his hand to reveal a completely healed palm. But there was so much blood, she notes with a beyond confused expression. Come on now, you know what I house and who I am, the hole was gone hours ago. I just didn't have time to remove the bandage because I was on my way here. Naruto smirked a bit at that as Shizune huffed and threw the bandage into the trash can. I'm still going to have you go through a checkup when you're done showering, Shizune said with a small pout as she crouched down before Karen again. Naruto couldn't help but sweat drop again, waving her off as he entered the bathroom and started to unseal some fresh clothes and seal away his dirty ones. Turning on the hot water, he sighed and stepped into the shower, washing away the blood, dirt, and sweat from the day before. After wiping his face dry with a towel, Naruto threw it up on a rack in the bathroom before starting to get dressed. Pulling on his clothes slowly, Naruto yawned a bit before finally putting his ANBU armor back in place, feeling his sore body everywhere. Great job, moron. You really shouldn't have gone easy on him, Naruto mutters, but mostly to himself as he opens the door into the hotel room, watching Tsunade busy working on Akari with her palms glowing green around her arms. Took you long enough, had a fun time with yourself in the shower. Tsunade teased with a smirk, making Naruto's cheeks turn light pink as he huffed at her. Shizune on the other hand almost choked on her own salvia, her cheeks rosy red as Karen looked beyond confused at them. Don't be ridiculous, Naruto muttered with an embarrassed look. Glancing over at Akari, Naruto frowned a bit as he looked over at Tsunade expectantly. Tsunade sighed a bit at his glance as her hands stopped glowing green, and rested her palms on her thighs. She was suffering from a severe case of chakra exhaustion, the marks on her arms being the source of the infection. She had been exposed to far too many chakra natures. May I ask what the reason behind these marks are? People heal from biting her, Naruto stated simply with a dark look before shaking it off his face. Will she be okay? He then asked, Karen also looking at the blonde woman as Shizune finished her checkup on the girl. Tsunade gave a soft smile and nodded. She will be, but her body has been fighting to survive for a long time. It's a miracle she hasn't passed out from chakra poisoning months ago. If you hadn't brought her when you did, she could have died in a few days, but as it seems now, she will, with enough rest and following checkups, be okay. I don't know when she will wake up, though I'm assuming a few days. Naruto sighed with relief and slumped down in a chair as he ran a hand through his damp hair. Thank God. So, I guess this means we have a lot of time to kill. You look tired, Gaki. Go relax at the hot springs on the other side of the border. They are quite famous for a reason. We'll look after these two, right, Shizune? Tsunade sighed and shifted her gaze to her young apprentice, who just nodded with a smile as she prepared a bed for the young tired Karen. Hi, Tsunade-sama. You can rest assured that these are in safe hands. Shizune quickly agreed as Naruto sighed, deciding that his armor wasn't needed anyway as he started to pull off his forearm guards and ANBU vest to lay in the corner. But remember our deal, Gaki, this isn't free. Tsunade reminded him with a smirk. Naruto just sighed at that and waved her off, knowing what she meant. Without saying another word to her, Naruto waltzed over and crouched down in front of Karen as he carefully placed a hand in her hair to ruffle it gently. I'm going to go out for a bit, you can rest here. Shizune-chan over there has prepared a bed for you so you can rest, and hopefully, your mom will be awake soon. Karen could only nod sleepily. Her brain was not able to go much longer before she would pass out on the floor. Naruto smiled softly at the girl and picked her up to gently place her under the covers of the bed, pushing a pillow under her head as he tucked her in, comfortable. He asked and stood tall again. Why yeah, when will you be back, Aniki? She asked sleepily, making the two older women that were awake in the room chuckle a bit. When did he say he saved them? She already called him Aniki. Ruffling her hair briefly, he sighed. In a few hours, I should be back by the time you wake up. He whispered and pulled the blanket up to cover her form. Hi, she mumbled tiredly as she started to doze off. The sound of light snoring following soon after. Naruto sighed again and walked over to exit the hotel room after that, leaving the safety of the two Uzumaki in Tsunade and Shizune's hands. 2 hours later, Yu no Kuni. Naruto was waltzing through the busy streets of Kuni. The hot springs had been nice, but he felt like it had been overexaggerated when people told him that it was a legendary place. Yeah, maybe it was nice and relaxing, but it didn't feel any different than taking a dip in the Konoha hot springs. Well, one exception being the possible lurking of his godfather Jiraiya. Sighing, he walked down a few stairs and found himself at a beach. He had only seen the actual ocean a few times, most of his missions didn't really go no near it, but when he could he would stop by to enjoy the sight. That reminded him of an embarrassing moment in his life. Mikoto had been telling him and Itachi about how much she wanted to see the actual ocean and go to the beach. They had started this talk when he and Itachi had returned from a mission near Mizu no Kuni, but that wasn't the embarrassing part. No, Mikoto had to go as far as to tell them in great detail that she had to live with skinny dipping in the Naka River instead. And as a teenager, it wasn't hard to figure out what kind of images he got in his head. As the thoughts and images started to creep up in his mind again, he started gaining a pink blush as the image of a topless Uchiha Mikoto in the water appeared in his mind before he punched himself in the nose to make it disappear. Son of a bitch. He cursed and grabbed his nose. Well, at least the images were gone now. He really had to kick Kakashi and Jiraiya's asses for showing him the great world of Ika Ika Paradise. Mikoto would surely kill him, and them too if she knew. Speaking of Mikoto, and my mother is okay with that? Itachi asked in shock. Naruto chuckled bitterly. I wouldn't say that. Oh, the silent treatment. Itachi then questioned. It's more like she left after she heard all that she needed to hear, Naruto said and shrugged. Itachi gave a bitter laugh at that, and placed a hand on his hip while patting Naruto's shoulder with his remaining hand. I suggest you come back with a souvenir. Why? Naruto asked, his brows flying upon his forehead. Let me just say it in a simple way. This is the first phase of my mother starting to give you the silent treatment. So unless you want to live through phase 2 and 3 of her being mad at you, I suggest getting her a gift, as that might be an option for getting her into a good mood again. Itachi finished, and Naruto mentally noted this down as the largest amount of words he had ever heard Itachi say in one go. Alright, I'll keep that in mind while I'm there. I'm dead, Naruto muttered to himself with a sweat drop. He had totally forgotten about that while being in Kusa. Getting an idea, Naruto looked around him and thought with a small hum, if she really wants to see the beach, I could bring it to her. No, that wouldn't work. I doubt I would have enough scrolls to seal the sand and water. And where would I put it? Ah, he groaned in frustration. You seem troubled, young man. An elderly voice called from beside him. Raising a brow, he let go of his hair that he had been pulling out in frustration and turned around to face a seemingly buff old man who was looking at him curiously. Yeah, I guess you could say so. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with yourself. Seems like you're in the doghouse. He joked lightly with a dry chuckle, making Naruto sweat drop. Shrugging slightly, the blonde ran a hand through his golden locks. I guess you could say so. I have someone at home that is mad at me for taking another job so quickly after getting home. It means she cares. Overworking yourself is bad for your health. Tell me about it. I've been married for long enough to know a few tricks to get out of the so-called doghouse. The man kept chuckling as he sat down on a bench behind them. Groaning in frustration, Naruto slumped down on a bench beside him and looked toward the ocean. It was an important job, I can't tell you much, sorry. She's mad I'm never home and taking so many jobs, and my friend told me that it would be in my greatest interest to essentially get her a souvenir. Quite the coincidence, I'm here for a job too. I've been building the bridges leading to and from the new hot springs. And you said she liked the beach. Why don't you bring her here then, and take her on a vacation? The old man asked in a gruff tone. Naruto seemed to think about that for a bit and shook his head. It's a bit too far, I'm afraid, and I need something a bit more meaningful, I guess. Well, if she liked the idea of the ocean, then why not make something for her yourself? There's a bunch of seashells here, you could make a wristband or a necklace perhaps. He then asked curiously, poking a few of said seashells with the tip of his sandals. Naruto blinked at that and reached down to pull a colorful seashell out of the sand, inspecting it between his fingers before smiling. You know what, that sounds like a great idea. I know it is. When you have lived with the same woman for as long as I have, you start to realize that the handmade gifts beat anything that you could ever buy in a store. The old man laughed a bit louder at that and rested back against the bench. So how long have you and our wife been married? Naruto asked and looked toward the man curiously, fidgeting the seashell around in his palm. The man sighed and looked a bit down into the sand at that. My wife passed away some years ago now. A bit before my grandson was born actually. I'm sorry to hear it. I hope she died painlessly. Naruto quietly asked. The man quickly nodded and smiled. She slept in. It might have been a bit early, but she had lived a long good life. I never actually go to know your name, kid. Oh, how rude of me. Uzumaki Naruto, at your service. Naruto chuckled as he extended his hand that was met by the older man's strong grip. Tazuna here, kid. So, about this woman of yours. You going to take my advice? Tazuna asked and Naruto nodded with a blush. She's not exactly my woman. She's my best friend's mom, and she is married. Naruto blushed and waved his hands around. Who? That's some serious homewrecking you got going on there, kid. And at such an early age too. Tazuna roared out laughing while clutching his stomach, the glasses on his face almost falling off. Groaning, Naruto slapped his forehead. No, it's not like that. I basically grew up with her, she's my aunt figure if anything else. And you don't know my age. Tell that to the smile you had on your face when you picked up that seashell. And to me, you look young as hell. Tazuna couldn't help but tease as we wiped some tears out of his eyes. Whatever. Naruto grunted with a twitching eyebrow. Looking on the watch on his arm, Tazuna sighed and shook his head. Looks like my break is almost over. It was nice meeting you, kiddo. Tell me, where you from by the way? I'm from Konoha, Tazuna-san, Naruto responded politely, making Tazuna raise a brow at him before he jabbed his shoulder slightly. Konoha, I guess you are shinobi then. You look way too fit for someone your age. Tazuna chuckled as he stood up from the bench with a stretch. Naruto chuckled and stood up as well as he summoned a few sparks of lightning in his palm. You got a good eye, Tazuna-san. PF, that's what it takes to be a master bridge builder. Tazuna beamed with pride. Naruto shook his head and pocketed the seashell while extending his hand toward the man again. It was indeed nice meeting you, Tazuna-san, thanks again for your advice. If you're ever in Konoha, just ask for me. I'll be sure to keep that in mind. Tazuna nodded and shook the blonde's hand before turning around to leave. Barely a few steps away, Tazuna turned his head and smirked at the blonde boy. Good luck with your homewrecking, kid. Oh, you got to be kidding me. Konohagakure no Sato, Uchiha compound. Ka-san, I think you should relax. That much stress isn't good for you. Itachi's sweat dropped as he watched his mother furiously wash the dishes off with great velocity. The plates looked as if they'd break if she continued. Mikoto dropped the plate back into the sink as she turned around to face her son. If you want to get rid of my stress, then go and get that blonde idiot home. She sighed and dropped her towel onto the kitchen counter. Itachi blinked slightly at that and put his cup of tea down onto the table. Sasuke, who had been watching, flinched slightly. It had been like this for the past few days since Naruto had been deployed again. Hell, Mikoto had even thrown a fit about going to the Hokage to tell him to let Naruto relax a bit instead of sending him on constant missions. Itachi grunted and took another sip. Naruto is ANBU like myself, it's part of the job description to be busy. Yes, I know that Itachi, but you're at least home taking a break right now. He isn't. That Naruto never takes a break. She sighed sadly, turning around to start finishing the rest of the dishes. Fugaku, who had been listening in as well, put down his papers and looked with a blank face. Naruto is a grown-up in the eyes of the law, he'll be fine. He said in a monotone voice before raising his papers again. Oh, I'm sure you are more than thrilled that he is away. Mikoto spat at him, making Fugaku raise a brow as he lowered the papers yet again with narrowed eyes. Itachi palmed his face and stood up, motioning for Sasuke to follow him with the promise of some training. He didn't want Sasuke around for what seemed to be the start of yet another argument. He quickly placed a few shuriken in Sasuke's hands and told him to go throw them at the training dummies. Sasuke, more than happy to agree, leapt down from the porch and down to the grass, and started to train. His Ni-san was finally helping him train again. Itachi kept standing right next to the door into the kitchen and listened, as Fugaku mumbled out, "I'm not thrilled that he is gone." Mikoto snorted at that and crossed her arms under her chest. "You aren't?" That little annoying smirk that seemed to grace your usual stoic frown told me otherwise when he mentioned how long he'd be away. Why does my mood always have to be associated with him? Fugaku grunted back with a small scowl. Mikoto threw her arms into the air and laughed. "Maybe because it looks like you want to paint rainbows on the compound walls whenever he's gone." Here they go again. Back in Kuni. Naruto, who had been busy trying to put together a necklace of seashells, sneezed and dropped a seashell at that. Someone had to be talking about him, he mused and kept fidgeting around with the shinobi wire, seashells and the senbon he had been using to poke holes in the seashells with. After around an hour, he tied the wire together and held up the necklace he had made. He smiled at the result and quickly stored it away in a small seal for safekeeping. He'd be seriously dead, or painfully alive if something happened to it before he came back to Konoha. Standing up and stretching his muscles, he yawned slightly. It had been a long night with little to no sleep. He hoped Akari and Karen were doing better. The former would hopefully wake up soon so that he could bring them back to Konoha. As he stood up, he groaned and looked out over the water. His eyes widened at the sight before him. A woman skinny dipping in the waters with dark hair and pale skin, quite like a certain woman he knew. As he watched her, her body seemed to change before his eyes. As she turned around, Naruto's eyes widened dangerously at the face he thought he was seeing. Why was she here? Blinking a few times he looked again, her entire exposed front toward him as she yelled. "Throw the ball back, Naruto-kun." Almost choking on his own salvia, he rubbed his eyes harshly before looking back down. She was gone. She had never been there. In her place was just a middle-aged dark-haired woman having fun with her boyfriend or husband. "Oi, Konoha Gaki, stop peeking at my daughter." He suddenly heard the yell of a now familiar person. The old man from earlier. Shaking his head clear with an immense blush, he went through the hand seals for the shunshin and disappeared in a swirl of leaves in a panic. He landed a few feet away from the hotel and yawned again as he snuck up to the hotel room again. Waltzing down to the door, he quickly opened it and walked in. Karen was still sound asleep on the bed, and Akari seemed as passed out as he left her. Sighing slightly, he looked over to see Shizune and Tsunade mixing together some medicinal herbs, and quietly walked over. Tsunade tilted her head in his direction and gave a quiet chuckle. "Never learned to knock Gaki. What if we had been in here? Then you would have gotten an eyeful," she teased, making Naruto roll his eyes at the female Sannin. Shizune giggled a bit at the bickering duo and grabbed the medicine they had been making, moving over to start smothering over the bite marks on Akari's arms. Naruto took the seat that Shizune had been using and groaned as he looked at Tsunade, who still gave him that teasing smirk. Perhaps you wanted an Eiffel. You could just have said so, Gaki. The blonde ANBU blushed heavily at that and smacked his forehead again. Could you stop it? Naruto groaned and propped his head on his hand, his elbow on the table as he watched Shizune treat Akari. Tsunade faked a pout as she nudged him in the side with her elbow. Don't be like that, aren't they big enough for you? Naruto almost choked on his own salvia as she said that and scowled at her. There's a kid in the room. So, she's sleeping. Tsunade shrugged, clearly enjoying the teasing of the blonde boy. Shizune snorted at her master and looked toward Naruto, who looked beyond tired and bothered. Why don't you take a nap, Naruto? I'll wake you up when Karen is awake or if something is up. Shrugging a bit, Naruto grabbed his cloak and folded it together. Scooting down on a spot on the floor, he used his cloak as a pillow and slowly closed his eyes. Deciding that getting some rest might as well be a good idea. So no Eiffel. Tsunade-sama. God damn it. 2 days later, Kuni. The next few days had been passing really slow. Shizune had brought Karen with her to the hot springs to try them out and also for shopping after new clothes. So now, instead of wearing ragged clothing, Karen was wearing green pants paired with a red blouse. After a shower, haircut, and getting her glasses cleaned as well, she actually looked like how a girl her age should. Naruto had been bored out of his mind most of the time. Sure, he had been looking after Karen and Akari the entire time, but there was only so much he could do while sitting on a chair day in and day out. So this chilly Saturday night he was sitting by the table and writing in a scroll, working on some new seals. Shizune and Tsunade had rented a new room next door because Karen and Akari were now occupying their former beds. Having his head propped on his palm as he wrote casually with his right hand before yawning slightly and looking over to the beds. Both of them were sleeping soundly, making him smile. Turning back to his current work in progress, he tried to come up with a way to make stored food stay fresh longer. When he had returned last time he had stocked up his entire kitchen, and unless he was lucky, he had to throw it all out and buy another stocked-up kitchen by the time he returned from here. So, in order to limit any future loss of food, he figured that he could try and use seals to come up with a way to make the food stay edible for a while longer. So far it didn't look promising. He had scrapped around 15 works so far and was now ripping up his 16th try in half with a quiet groan. As he was pulling out another piece of paper he heard a soft grunt. The sound of the grunt being too deep to be from Karen, he quickly turned his head with wide eyes. To his pleasant surprise, Akari was sitting up in the bed. Akari-san. He called quietly and rushed over to her, putting a hand on her back as she groaned and coughed, tapping her throat a bit with her finger. Naruto blinked and smacked his forehead as he rushed out to fill a glass with water before returning, carefully handing her the glass filled with cool liquid. Akari smiled weakly up at him and started to lift the cup to let the cool liquid clear up her throat as Naruto supported her back and hand. Thank you, she muttered lowly and looked around. As her eyes settled on Karen, she relaxed again. Her baby was safe. And so was she, apparently. Naruto, who had noticed her confused look, sat down on the edge of the bed. You passed out as you were running. You were having a severe case of chakra poisoning and infection, so I brought you to some friends. We are currently at the border between Hai no Kuni and Yu no Kuni. How did we get here? She asked tiredly, her eyes half lidded with dark bags under her eyes as she tried to stay awake. Naruto chuckled softly and pointed a finger at himself. I carried you two here. Wait. We were being chased. What happened? Are you unharmed? I couldn't sense you for a while, she groggily mumbles, remembering the moments before she had collapsed on the bridge. Naruto blushed a bit and nods at her. I'm perfectly fine, don't worry about it. Ryujin got his kicked and we got here safely. Now just rest, it's the middle of the night. Ryujin, you fought him. Akari mumbled with worry, her eyes looking him up and down to see any noticeable wound or damage to him. Yeah, but I won. Now sleep, we can talk in the morning. Naruto reassured and gently pushed on her shoulder to get her to lay down again. As Akari settled under the blankets, Naruto helped tuck her in and moved to turn the light off he had been writing seals under. As he was about to flick the light switch he heard a soft, "Thank you." It made him smile, and he turned off the light a second later. Letting the darkness overtake the room as he settled down on the floor again, using his cloak as a pillow. Konohagakure no Sato, crouched down in a meeting before the Hokage and his 3 advisors, Shisui sighed as he lifted his head to look at the 4 figures before him. So as it stands, the coup is still in motion. Hiruzen lowered his gaze with a saddened look. I see. He answered in barely a whisper. Danzo, who had been listened in calmly so far, leaned forward in his seat and turned his head toward Hiruzen. Hiruzen, what's your plan now? If we remain idle for any longer, then it's going to be too late. Hiruzen just hummed out, no response coming from his lips as he closed his eyes and seemed to be deep in thought. Danzo took this as his chance to speak again. Look. As the head of the village, sometimes it's necessary for you to make hard decisions. Isn't now the time to do just that? Danzo finished, his eyes narrowing slightly toward Hiruzen. Please wait. The surprising sudden interference was from Shisui. Hiruzen and the other advisors looked surprised at him as they raised their gazes to look at the young Uchiha prodigy. As the attention was fully on him, Shisui lifted his head with determination in his eyes. If I may, I think I have an alternative. There's a plan I'd like to try if you'll let me. A new hope seemed to shine through in Hiruzen's eyes as he looked at Shisui with wide eyes. A plan, you say? Hiruzen started but was never able to finish as Danzo moved in to interrupt. With his eyes narrowed, Danzo butted in, and spoke through a seemingly stressed tone. This is a waste of time. There are no other options right now. Completely ignoring Danzo's protest, Hiruzen kept his focus sorely on Shisui as he spoke. What is this plan, Shisui? What Shisui spoke next in an alarming calm tone made the entire room gasp with wide eyes in surprise. I will use my Mangekyo Sharingan on the clan. The first sound that greeted Naruto in the morning was the hectic crying of a very touched Karen. Opening his eyes, he sat up against the wall and cursed the pain in his neck. You would have thought Orochimaru had a play in this, but it was just his sleeping position for the past few days that was messing with him. It shouldn't be a surprise that sleeping on the ground and using a thin cloak as your pillow would end up in either back and or neck pain. Groggily blinking his eyes open, he couldn't, despite the pain in his neck, keep a smile off of his face as he watched the babbling and wailing child clinging to her mother that was sitting on the bed, whispering reassuring words in the ears of her child meanwhile stroking her red locks. Seems like you've saved my life yet again, Naruto-san. The soft words came from Akari, whose gaze had fixated on him when she had noticed he wasn't asleep anymore. That boy, a total stranger. Or well, maybe not anymore. Had gone out of his way for her and her daughter more than anyone in their life. He had gone as far as to save her life twice. Naruto placed a hand over his mouth as he rested his back in against the wall. Ma, don't mention it. I think it's written with bold letters in the family manual that you're supposed to take care of each other. Naruto lamely joked, yet it still managed to make the older woman smile with a soft giggle. Karen's ear perked up at the sound of her, Aniki, who had finally woken up. Bouncing out of her mother's lap, she ran across the floor, and to Akari's big surprise, her daughter swung her small arms around the tall blonde's neck in the most suffocating hug a child shouldn't be able to give. Anyo, Aniki, can you dye your hair? The question made Naruto raise a brow with a confused gaze. Dye his hair? Was there something wrong with his hair color? Tilting his head slightly, he asked, and why should I dye my hair? I like my hair. Karen blushed slightly and ran back up to her mom, pointing at their heads, then you can look like us. Like an Uzumaki. Naruto's face dropped into the floor before sitting up again. Are all Uzumaki this energetic and weird in the morning, beside me? He thought with a large sweat drop hanging off of his forehead. Akari giggled at her child's behavior and placed a hand on her head, ruffling Karen's hair softly. Go easy on Naruto-san dear, I think his hair should stay blonde. Rather charming to have a blonde Uzumaki, wouldn't you agree? I guess. Oh, Tsunade-chan is also blonde Uzumaki. Karen beamed up as the blonde Sanin came to mind. The kind lady that had been kind of weird, but had been treating her mom back to being well again. Akari's eyes widened at the mention of that name. Tsunade was quite a famous persona. Tsunade. As in Tsunade of the legendary Sanin, the supposed best medic around. She stuttered out, her gaze fixing on Naruto. She is only part Uzumaki, but yes. Her. You looked quite sick, and I doubted that without the experience she had, you'd live. So I brought you to the best of the best. Naruto smirked slightly, and as if that had been her cue to enter, Tsunade knocked on the door and entered. Rise and shine Gakio, you're awake. Welcome back to the land of the conscious. You've been out of it for a while. Tsunade muttered as she entered the room. Her pigtails swaying behind her as she walked, and her apprentice right on her heels. Akari's eyes widened even further as the one and only slug Sanin entered the room. Bowing her head down, she stuttered out again, Tsunade-sama. I have no idea on how to thank you for treating me and saving my life. Tsunade's eyebrow twitched slightly as she walked over and bonked Naruto on the head. Don't thank me, thank the Gaki here. He brought you here, and he has given me my payment. No debts, it's all been solved. Naruto couldn't help but pout as he was hit on the head but smiled slightly with a nod as she mentioned that everything had been paid and there was no debt lingering for the sudden treatment. The red-haired woman started tearing up as she bowed her head, muttering many soft sentences of, thank you, as she clung to her daughter who giggled at her mother's odd behavior. Around 5 hours later, it was finally around noon time. Akari and Karen had been going through the last few checkups, and after a tearful goodbye from Karen's side, the Uzumaki trio was finally about to head out from the hotel room. Tsunade flicked Naruto's forehead with her pointing finger as she leaned in against the doorframe, watching the trio stand in the hallway. Don't overwork the woman Gaki, she has still just woken up last night. Make sure that she gets a proper meal before departing, and a trip to the hot springs would be good for her body's healing. Tsunade instructed sternly with her arms crossed beneath her bosom. Hi, don't worry. We aren't going to be leaving the area before evening if everything goes according to plan. It'll take 2 days on foot, but if I carry them throughout the night we should be back in Konoha by morning. Naruto explained as he rubbed his forehead with annoyance. Shizune, who was standing behind her master, raised a curious brow at that. Why are you in such a rush to get back to Konoha? You could take the day off and relax, sleep here, and then depart by morning. Naruto blushed with an enormous sweat drop. If Mikoto found out that he had been slagging on getting back, there would surely be hell to pay. Let's just say I got a furious thing reeling me in back at Konoha. And of course, I shouldn't keep Oji-san waiting. The Uchiha woman still scaring you shitless. Tsunade roared out with laughter and clutched her stomach. She had met Naruto quite a few times already, and the topic of a certain Uchiha Mikoto had often been on topic. The woman was ready to murder for the blonde to take a break, she obviously cared a lot for him. Naruto facepalmed at that. She doesn't scare me, but I'd rather not make her upset with me. Everything will be easier that way. You don't want to make your girlfriend upset. I guess I can respect that. Tsunade smirked with a teasing grin forming on her lips. Naruto slapped his forehead hardly at that and decided to follow up with slamming his forehead into the wall. She isn't my girlfriend. She is a married woman for crying out loud, and my best friend's mom. She is basically my aunt at this point. What is it with you and always teasing me like that? A marriage hasn't seemed to be able to stop other lovers from carrying out their inner desires before. And I'm just teasing you, Gaki. Take a break and relax, would you? It's not like it's a taboo topic to talk about if you did like her that way. I mean, of course, homewrecking would be looked down upon. And I doubt this Uchiha Itachi would be happy that you were having a go at this mom and Tsunade-sama. Shizune cried out in protest as she stood in between Naruto and her master, a furious blush on her face from all the stuff her master dared to mention in front of Naruto, and even a child. Tsunade just waved her off and walked back inside. Don't spoil my fun, Shizune, he's fun to tease. Good trip, Gaki. If you feel like gambling, let me know, I could use the extra money. Naruto just kept trying to rub this growing blush on his cheeks away as he started walking away with Akari and Karen in tow. The latter two were quite perplexed about the conversation, one giggling away at the teasing and the other not quite able to understand any of it, but found her Aniki's flustered face to be hilarious. Have a safe trip, Shizune called from the doorway, making Naruto turn around with a casual wave. Yeah, be well until next time. And do something about Tsunade, would you? I'm getting a heart attack from being near her. Naruto groaned out loudly, making the dark-haired girl giggle away with a shake of her head. Naruto and Tsunade would always be like that, nothing would be able to change that. And it was kind of cute the way Naruto seemed to talk about this Uchiha Mikoto, even if he was insisting on denying the possibility of attraction to her. When the Uzumaki trio had finally left the hotel, Naruto decided to guide them toward a local restaurant with an all-you-can-eat buffet. The place wasn't much to be excited over, but the overall food quality had been said to be one of the best around the area. So getting a table in the corner of the restaurant, they were handed plates and chopsticks and were told to just go up and get as much they wanted. The lunch was rather eventful. A woman such as Akari that seemed to carry herself with pride, was now stuffing her face with food. It was a bit fun but sadder to watch. She must really have been starving in Kusa. When Akari and Karen finished eating to their heart's content, Naruto paid and they were just sitting and relaxing for a bit until Akari decided to ask Naruto something. Naruto-san, if I may ask, who is this Uchiha Mikoto that you were getting endlessly teased about earlier? Akari asked in a soft tone, making Naruto blush at the mention of teasing. Sighing into his hand, he leaned into his seat and shrugged. Well, she is the mother of my best friend Itachi. When my parents died, she took me in. She raised me after my parents were unable to, and had my back when I needed it. She still occasionally asks me over to dinner with the family, and she is quite fun for an Uchiha, considering that most of them and especially her husband Fugaku is grumpy. She can be a bit scary, but I know she means well. She just cares about my health and gets upset with how much I work and train, but yeah. She is kind, she is a loving mother, she's loyal, she's pretty and beautiful, huh? Naruto's eyebrow started twitching dangerously as Akari fell into a giggling mess. Sorry, I just found it a bit funny. I mean no offense, she sounds wonderful. It was just the way you described her. I can understand why Tsunade-sama would tease you about her. You did also say she is pretty and beautiful, and I doubt that is a word you'd casually use when describing the mother of your said best friend. Okay. I'll admit I think she's a beautiful woman, but I don't like her the way all of you think I do. She's like my aunt, but I care for her obviously. Naruto pouted with his arms crossed over his chest. Perhaps not yet, but you sound awfully close. Attraction canon will 9 out of 10 times build up and evolve into feelings. Akari thought to herself with a small smile and looked down at her daughter. That was how she had been created anyway. As she nodded at his answer, her mind wandered again. Naruto seemed to think of this woman in high regard, she would look forward to meeting her soon hopefully. Very well then. Yet, I'll remind of you never saying never, Naruto-san. Didn't Tsunade-sama mention some glorious hot springs? Akari finished, changing the topic of their conversation to spare Naruto of any more embarrassment. Naruto blinked and nodded his answer, yeah, though I wouldn't call them glorious. The environments are just calmer and the water feels nicer. They aren't that different than the ones in Konoha, but I guess if you pay more for the deluxe baths, then your experience would better. Akari frowned a bit. Of course, she had been ignorant for a second. It obviously costs money to go there. If you're frowning about the money, don't sweat about it. I got it covered. Naruto chuckled through a small smirk as Akari's eyes widened in surprise. How did you? She mumbled out slowly with a tilt of her head. Shaking his head, the blonde stood up and patted his full stomach as he motioned for them to follow. I told you I'd take care of you, and I don't want any disagreements. We're going to relax at the hot springs, and I don't want anything for this. And I'm tempted to throw a fit if you disagree. Akari was about to her disagreement, but considering Naruto was almost threatening about throwing a fit, she shut up. After all, this blonde boy had taken out Ryujin on his own. How wasn't he wounded? It was to her knowledge that Uzumaki healed faster, of course, but Ryujin wasn't a pushover from what she had heard around the village in Kusa. Fine, but I stand by my terms concerning helping you around the house. I'll cook and clean, and I'll throw a fit if you disagree with that. Now it was Karen's time to flinch a bit. While her mother was kind, she was born the usual Uzumaki stubbornness. Naruto on the other hand sweat dropped. Akari was beginning to look more and more like his mother, and not just in looks. Hi. He gulped. The mere image of a second Kushina appearing was enough to startle him. While he normally wasn't afraid of much, there were a few things that startled him. Snakes, angry Chunin instructors, and a mother's wrath. Soon after they were checked in at the Kuni hot springs. Compared to what Naruto had been treating himself to the last time, he decided that for Karen and Akari's sake, that they would get the more expensive deluxe experience that the hot springs had to offer this season. To say it was better was an understatement. What Naruto had experienced the first time was just hot water and rocks. This time there were candles, relaxing music, and separated areas for one person to enjoy alone. These separated areas were quite big in size, it wasn't too big nor too small for a single person. The water was a few degrees hotter, allowing the heat to really sink into the muscles. So here they were. Karen and Akari had their own little bath to relax in, and Naruto from his own bath could hear the child laughing and giggling away with excitement. They probably hadn't experienced a hot springs area before. Sighing with content, Naruto folded his arms on a rock and rested his chin down on his forearms, his eyes fluttering close as he let out yet another small sigh. Simply letting the warm water wash away the stress and strain of the last few days. He didn't want to scare Karen or Akari earlier, but the actual reason he wanted to leave was that he had a bad feeling in his gut. If the leader of Kusa was so desperate to get them back in his custody that he would confront them in person, then Naruto sincerely doubted that this was the last they would see of them. It honestly felt like they had given them up too easily. So, in order to keep his lost family safe and sound, he wanted to get out of here as fast as possible, even if he had to carry them all the way to the protecting walls of Konoha. And he had felt the presence of people with stronger chakra signatures around the area the other nights. He was almost certain that either Kusa or other shinobi was around the area. And while he was confident in his ability, he'd rather avoid the conflict. They had a child with them, and a woman that had just woken up and finished her treatment after all. He had clones hiding all around the town, transformed into rocks, bushes, and all kinds of objects to scout and keep watch for him. So if anything suspicious happens, then he would know in an instant when they were popped. And as if he had dared the devil to show himself, he felt a tingling sensation in the back of his head. One of his clones had popped. And it wasn't on its own free will. His eyes snapping open as he started seeing all the memories and last visions of several clones that had been hiding a few streets away from the hot springs. Gritting his teeth with anger bubbling in the very depths of his core, Naruto leapt out of the hot water and rushed into the changing room. Quickly getting dressed as he pulled out his scrolls, unsealing his armor as several more clones popped to alert him. They were inching closer and closer to the hot springs at a rapid pace. There must have been either spies or scouts in the area. He didn't know how they would otherwise have found them so quickly. Placing his ANBU gear back in place, he hurriedly unsealed his sword and the blade he had stolen or taken as spoils of war from Ryujin a few days prior. And placed them on his back and at his waist respectively. Crossing his fingers as he stood in the private changing room, he muttered softly to himself, multi-shadow clone jutsu. And a dozen clones appeared around him. All of them quickly transformed their appearance into that of workers and guests of the hot springs before scattering all around the area. Naruto himself hurried to the wall where Karen and Akari were behind and knocked on it. As he waited, more and more of his clones got popped. He had no one left now to spy on the area around him besides the clones that were transformed and hiding within the walls of the hot springs. Akari was the one to open the wooden door with a towel wrapped around her body. A small blush on her face as she opened her mouth to speak but was quickly shoved inside the area again and the door was closed. When she saw it was Naruto, and that he was clad in the battle uniform she had first seen him in, her eyes widened with her lips trembling. There's someone here and I don't know yet if it's Kusa or not. I had clones keep watch for me, but they were all disposed of in mere moments. I only have clones inside the hot springs now, and you two need to get dressed as fast as possible. We need to get out of here, there are too many civilians and risks from staying here. Naruto whispered out demandingly, and Akari dumbly nodded as she grabbed Karen and rushed out to change back into their clothes. It only took a few minutes, and the two red-headed females came out wearing their clothes. Their hair was damp and wet as they panted slightly, and Naruto instantly grabbed onto Akari's free hand as she held the confused and scared Karen to her chest with her other hand. Slowly dragging them throughout the hot springs, Naruto reached up and slowly pulled his sword out of its sheath. Holding it up before him as the light of the dancing flames from the candles reflected off of it and onto the walls around them in yellow and orange patterns. The first clone within the hot springs popped. They were at the entrance. It was only a matter of time now before panic would spread throughout the establishment. It was beyond his understanding all of this. True, they were in Yu no Kuni, but they were so close to the Hai no Kuni borders yet again. Was Kusa really that desperate? While they were already in shit to their knees from the political issues they had just been put in, they were assaulting a Konoha shinobi for the second time around. Oh, there would be hell to pay when Hiruzen found out about this without a doubt. He was at a disadvantage right now. More and more clones were popping left and right. They were surrounded. There had to be a skilled shinobi or kunoichi among them if they were so easily able to distinguish his clones from ordinary people. And he was tasked with protecting both Akari and Karen. He was without a doubt on the defense in an upcoming fight. Finding a nearby closet, Naruto looked around him before turning around to make Akari face him. We got a few options. I can either hide you in here and fight them off on the offense, or bring you with me and fight, but all without a doubt be on the defense. All, of course, have clones guarding you, but I'd rather not leave you two out of my sight for too long. Akari's face lowered with a guilt-filled frown. She hadn't been in Naruto's company for more than about a week, and she was already giving him this much trouble. Attacks from left and right, constantly protecting them and treating her. He even got a Sannin to heal her since she had been so sick and fatigued. I don't know. It seems like all I bring you is bloodshed and battle. Perhaps the wisest option for you would be to hand us over again. Or just hand me over, but take Karen with you. I want my child to grow up happy in Konoha, and she got you there. Her Aniki. You can protect her, keep her safe, and I'll do the same by staying in Kusa. Akari mumbled out in distress before Naruto squeezed her hand tightly, making her gasp with a confused glance. No, we're Uzumaki, and we stick together. You are my family, Karen is my family, and I won't hand you back even if I'm on my dying breath. I'm not overconfident by saying this, but if I can take out their leader, I doubt that I can't take out what other goons they had to offer me this time. But you got to take Karen with you and hide somewhere. I don't want her to experience what I'm about to do. Naruto spoke with determination as he lowered his sword and let go of Akari's hand. Reaching into his pouch, he pulled out a kunai and placed it in her hand before curling her fingers around it tightly. You take this and hide here. I'll be back as soon as possible. He spoke as if it was the end of this conversation, just making her dumbly nod. Nodding with satisfaction, Naruto crossed his fingers again and started to create 2 more clones, but these 2 were pumped up with enough chakra to resemble that of 50 clones respectively. The 2 clones quickly hid with Akari and Karen in the closet, closing the door before Naruto blew out the candles in the hallway to let the area go dark. It was showtime. The darkness erupted in the room as the candles flickered out, leaving a trail of smoke to rise to the ceiling. Grabbing the hood of his cloak, Naruto pulled it over his head before drawing the sword he had taken from the leader of Kusa. Racing off into the dark hallways, Naruto mentally prayed for Akari and Karen to be safe. Jumping off into the ceiling to stick to it, Naruto stayed there as the screams he had predicted started echoing all over the hot springs. They were here now. If they dared to lay a single finger on any of the civilians, then he would brutally slaughter them. Snorting quietly to himself, he reminded himself that it had been the plan all along. They were daring to mess with his family, and he wouldn't allow that. So as he kept hiding at the ceiling, his back against it as his front was facing toward the floor, he started hearing the rapid running footsteps racing throughout the establishment. As he had suspected, they were shinobi. Their chakra signatures were getting closer faster than a civilian would be able to, and the moment his eyes came into contact with 2 figures running beneath him, he dropped from the ceiling. Cutting the flow of chakra from his palms and feet, he tightly grabbed his sword and dropped just down on top of them. Pointing his blades downward, he gritted his teeth as he stabbed both of them in the back of their head. Landing right in between them as their bodies were slammed into the wooden floor, a pool of blood already spilling from their corpses as he pulled his blades out of their fractured skulls. Those were weak. He honestly found it insulting. He had been facing off ANBU-level shinobi the last time, along with the village leader, but these 2 didn't even seem like Chunin level, but this also meant the strong one that was able to sense his clones were also still out there somewhere. There wasn't any time to waste, and he was beyond tired of dealing with Kusa. He wanted to go home, with his family. So, with a quick hand seal, he body flickered toward the place he could sense the most chakra signatures. He landed with a swirl of leaves around his frame right in the middle of a small group of 5. His presence startled them, but before they could mutter a word they were already at the mercy of the blonde's blades. Moving fast and swift around, he spun beneath an incoming fist and decapitated the arm of his enemy, letting the limp fall down to the ground with an audible thud as the man screamed with blood pouring out of the stump that was left of his arm. To put the man out of his misery, Naruto stabbed his sword up through the man's skull, blood dripping down the metal of his sword before he kicked the corpse through a paper wall. The remaining 4 shook in place as they took a step back. The hooded figure had just mercilessly torn down their comrade in barely a second, looking like a nightmare in the dark as he turned around to look at them. The blood of their friend dripping from the tip of his sword. "Which one of you losers are in charge?" Naruto asked coldly as he flicked the blood off of his sword. His body slowly starting to walk toward them as they scrambled against the wall. These shinobi were a joke. How desperate could Kusa be? This was an insult to his ability, or perhaps Kusa simply didn't have anything to offer him. "Our Ryazaki-sama," one of them yelled out with despair and pushed his back up against the wall as he with a trembling hand held a kunai in his grasp, a desperate attempt to cling to his life. Naruto tilted his head as he effortlessly flicked his sword against the kunai, letting the metal fly out of the man's grasp and onto the floor with a loud metal ringing sound. "And which of you weaklings is Ryazaki?" "I already beat one. Ryu, so who's this loser?" "Our Ryazaki-sama is Ryujin-sama's son." A female tone muttered from his right, standing in the corner of the corridor with her legs trembling with fear. "You guys are utterly pathetic. You are shinobi, yet you also trash around with the fear of death in your veins. You are not true shinobi, you are academy students with a headband." Naruto roared out with slight anger, his sword in a split second later thrust up into the chest of the man he had interrogated the moment before. Blood pouring out of the wound in his chest as he coughed up blood, and fell limply to the ground. The woman gasped and felt like vomiting as yet another comrade of hers was slaughtered like a farm animal. His body lying limply against the wall with a pool of blood forming beneath him. The remaining 3 of her teammates trying to make a run for it, but before they could even get around the corner, 3 shining kunai were embedded into the back of their skull respectively, while this masked monster's hand was outstretched in their directions. The attack had been so fast, she hadn't even seen or heard the kunai being thrown. "You're a monster," she screamed and fumbled into her pouch, screaming with tearful eyes and a pale face as she desperately threw shuriken, kunai, and senbon to save her life, but the blade of Naruto's sword was easily deflecting them all over the hallway. With a soft chuckling, Naruto kicked the man's lifeless corpse. "I'm a shinobi, it kind of lays in the job description. So if you are such a coward, I give you a way out of this. Tell me where Ryazaki is, and I'll let you live. And what is your goal here?" "You Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha crippled Ryujin-sama, we need the female Uzumaki to heal him. And Ryazaki is outside. There are only F5 more of us in here," she yelled out, not even daring to think for a second before blurting everything out. And Naruto could tell she wasn't lying. Naruto sheathed his sword and crossed his arms over his chest. "I already cut down 2, so that means 3 more. Tell me of this Ryazaki, what should I expect from him?" She couldn't believe this. So many of her comrades were already dead. What kind of monster was this guy? And how did Uzumaki Naruto find him on such a short notice? Or could it be that this was the man that had taken down their leader and crippled him? Slumping down against the wall, she felt powerless and weak as she stared up at the hooded man. "Ryazaki-sama is a water release user, he has a sword. A- and that's all I know, Please believe me. I have never fought along with Ryazaki-sama before, I don't know anything else. She wailed out. Naruto felt truly sorry for this girl. She had been put in harm's way by her village, and he doubted she was anything above Chunin at most. He wanted to spare her, but if Kusa had to know the hard way that he wasn't to be messed with, he couldn't leave any survivors. Unless he wanted one to tell the tale and give a message. As promised, I'll let you live, tell you Ryujin Dono that if he dares to mess with Konoha again, I won't spare his shinobi any more mercy, but if I see your face ever again, I will take my mercy back and feed you limp by limp to the Shinigami. Naruto threatened as he released a bone-chilling killing intent all over the hallway, making the woman cry out in fear as she rapidly nodded. With a swift blow to her neck, she gasped with salvia flying out of her mouth as she was knocked out by Naruto's hand. The side of his hand had been chopped right into her neck, making her vision go black as she passed out against the floor. Shaking his head at the bloodshed he had committed, Naruto sighed and pulled out the sword he had taken from Kusa, out of its sheath. This sword had belonged to his enemy's father, and to be sure his message came through to this Ryazaki fellow. He would cut him down with his own father's blade. Not that the message would have much meaning when he was dead. Yet the sour justice would be a sweet pleasure for Naruto. He didn't enjoy bloodshed, but he would do anything to make sure his family was safe. Ryazaki of Kusa was standing outside of the hot springs. He had taken great pleasure in hearing all of the screams echoing from inside. His father had been weak and overconfident in his ability to take down one man, he wouldn't be so foolish. He loved and respected his old man, but he needed a stronger will for the sake of Kusa. As the door creaked open, he narrowed his eyes as one of his shinobi came slowly waltzing out through the door. I had heard the tales of the Yondaime Hokage's son, yet I never believed fully that he was indeed as powerful as the stories and bingo book suggests. The man he had been talking to fell limply down to the ground, revealing the cloaked Naruto, who chuckled and reached up to pull his hood down. So as I thought, you do indeed have some sensory skills. It surprised me that someone was able to take out all of my clones, it indeed did surprise me. Kusa produces some of the best shinobi, it's an insult to our nation that you think so little of us. Ryazaki snorted as he flicked some of his dark locks out of his face. His sharp narrowed eyes glaring daggers at this blonde boy that was daring to stand above his dead shinobi, holding his father's sword in his hand as it belonged to him now. Snorting with laughter, Naruto leaned down to wipe the sword's blade clean on the dead man's clothes, adding more salt to Ryazaki's wounds as the man clenched his fist tightly, digging his nails into his palm to draw a few droplets of blood. If some of the best were taken down so easily, I think I should dub myself the next Shinobi no Kami. This was a pathetic bunch, they cried and begged for mercy. What were they? Genin level. Chunin maybe. Naruto snorted as he pushed the corpse away with the tip of his foot. They were mere cannon fodder to weaken the enemy, they served their purpose. You've yet to experience the real challenge. I doubt you'll surrender, so let's see what the oh-so-great Uzumaki Naruto has to offer. Ryazaki roared out, and Naruto could have sworn he saw the image of Ryujin behind him. Father like son indeed. Shaking his head, Naruto lifted the blade and decided to put it to the test. Kusa had produced great weapons in the past, so he wanted to see if this one lived up to the tales. Lightning crackled around his fist as the entire edge was surrounded by a dark blue coat of lightning, the sparks of electricity flying off the blade. I went easy the last time, I'm not going to make that mistake twice. Naruto thought to himself as he disappeared from sight. Appearing straight beside Ryazaki, who scowled and backflipped away from the lightning-fast sword that roared with the lightning-coated slicing through the air. Ryazaki flipped a few feet away, the wind rushing through his hair as he flipped through hand seals at a quick pace, Don't underestimate me. Like I would fall for such a pathetic attack. He shouted back with angry veins forming all over his face. Water release. Water serpents. He roared out, and the entire ground started rumbling. The roof of the hot springs establishment flew off as three huge serpents made out of the boiling water flew into the air. Snorting, Naruto leapt straight into the air and above the three serpents, his hand letting go of the sword as it swirled in the air beside him. His hands going through hand seals at light speed as his hands crackled with lightning. Lightning release bullet. Splitting powerful breath. Naruto calmly called out as he spread his palm that was immediately covered in blinding blue lights of condensed lightning chakra. Thrusting his hand forward, he unleashed a splitting lightning bolt that wrapped all around the three serpents. Narrowing his eyes as the serpents inched closer by the second, Naruto clenched his fist tightly together as the lightning powerfully squeezed the water jutsu. With an agony-filled cry, the three serpents exploded into a shower of burning hot water. Landing on a nearby ceiling, it didn't take Naruto a moment before he had finished his next series of hand seals. Thrusting both lightning-covered palms forward this time, he called out, "Lightning release, false darkness." Two identical dark blue spears of lightning sprung out of his palms with a thunderous roar. Ryuzaki almost didn't have any time to react before he had to form a water wall to protect himself. The water-based defense barely managed to form in time before it was destroyed without mercy. The electrolyzed water exploding all over him as his body burned with the paralyzing electricity running through his veins. Groaning with gritted teeth, Ryuzaki kneeled down and fumbled with his sword to get out of its sheath. His semi-paralyzed body barely reacting to his brain's commands. "Why, you got some nerve," he muttered out with a shaking body that was still twitching from the lightning attack, his sword barely grasped as he almost dropped it onto the ground at the sound of a loud thunderclap beside him. Without time to turn his head, a powerful lightning-coated fist was striking his cheek with such velocity and power that it sends him flying at light speed into the hot springs, crashing through wall after wall. The audible sound of bones cracking met his ears as he winced loudly in pain. Naruto stood calmly back in place as the lightning that had been covering his feet and hands disappeared. Reaching his hand into the air, he grabbed the hilt of the sword he had let go of earlier and quickly sheathed it in its sheath. "You speak so proudly of Kusa's powerful shinobi, but yet I have to see any. I was foolish enough to hold back against your old man, I won't make the same mistake twice. Seems like I overestimated your power as a censor as well, or maybe you were just too slow." The blonde taunted. "Don't mock my power." The loud roar came from the former nice hot springs. The cry of the rage of despair was followed with a huge water dragon tearing down the rest of the place as it flew into the sky, glaring down at Naruto's form. "Your ignorance shall be your downfall just as it nearly was mine." Naruto sighed and flipped through some similar hand seals and raised his fist into the air again. The splitting lightning bolt springing out of his arm to crash right into the mouth of the water dragon. The water dragon exploded above the surrounding houses, raining with hot electrolyzed water. Ryuzaki came flying out of the remains of the destroyed water dragon, his sword held high as his skin was severely burned all over his body. Attempting to cut down at Naruto, the blonde easily sidestepped and drew both of his blades, one quickly blocking and redirecting another swift attack from the Kusa shinobi, and the remaining one getting jammed right down through the man's thigh to split it open. Ryuzaki's eyes widened with horror as he cried out in pain. He looked down and watched the blood pour out of his leg as the sword was mercilessly yanked out of his leg, cutting the wound even further open. His eyes were so filled with anger and fury, the pain in his blood-soaked leg ignored as he stood up and attempted to cut Naruto down with blind fury behind each swing of his sword. Naruto started to feel pity for this man as well. He was like an exact copy of his former opponent, Ryujin. Seemed like this overconfident behavior was a family trait, or perhaps just the way of Kusa. Sighing to himself while evading every quick slash and stab, the blonde felt no pattern or strategy behind any of these attacks. Ryazaki was like a wounded animal. Shaking his head again, Naruto drew his sword out of its sheath and channeled his lightning chakra through it. Deciding to put an end to the man's misery, he blocked the next incoming slash at his chest and pushed the man back. The pain in Ryazaki's leg started to show itself more and more, almost unable to move back as the blonde forced him into the defense yet again. He was forced to bring his own up to block an incoming attack, the clashing of their blades sending sparks of lightning all over his face and into his eyes. Groaning loudly, he fell onto his rear, holding his sword up as the blonde cut at him over and over again. The lightning-filled blade was proving more and more dominant. The blade in Ryuzaki's hand starting to get more and more red glowing from the heat, and the blade soon snapped in half and he dropped the hilt. His palms filled with burn marks as his flesh was smoking. Naruto frowned with the pity all over his face. He could without a second thought strike him down here in self-defense. It wouldn't hurt Konoha or anyone. He was the one that got attacked after all. And the village surely wouldn't mind that he took the life of the man terrorizing their home. Ryazaki's face got crazier and crazier as his eyes bulged out of his head. Do it. Don't you have the balls to do it? Are you some pathetic weakling? Is this all Konoha has to offer? A spineless coward. Ryazaki never got to say another word as the lightning-coated blade was stabbed right in through his mouth, escaping the back of his neck as his eyes became dull and lifeless. You can insult me, but insult my home or family and I won't spare you any mercy, Naruto muttered primarily to himself. His opponent was too dead to hear it after all. Akari had been hearing the tons of screams and cries of battle. Somehow this lone section of the hot springs hadn't been torn down during the fight, but she had heard the roof and walls getting torn down around her and Karen. Speaking of Karen, the child was hiding her mother's clothes as the two clones stood guard on each side of the door. She gasped when the two clones suddenly vanished out of existence, leaving two small clouds of smoke behind. Soon the sound of echoing footsteps on the wooden floor outside of the became louder and louder, before stopping right outside of the closet she was hiding in. Holding up her kunai, she was getting ready until she heard Karen mutter, "Aniki." Blinking at her daughter's words, and sensed out the area. With a soft sigh, she lowered the kunai. It was just Naruto. Opening the door up, she was immediately greeted with the sight of Naruto soaked in blood and looked him all over. "Naruto. Are you alright? What happened to you?" she asked with worry evident in her voice. Hi. I'm alright. He chuckled with embarrassment, scratching the back of his head. Akari narrowed her eyes skeptically at him and stood out of the closet, Karen following right behind her as she looked him over. "You're covered in blood," she stated, and Naruto felt like face palming at his point. "It isn't mine, so don't worry. I didn't get wounded this time around." He kept chuckling in a soft manner. While he hadn't held back, he hadn't gone all out either. He wouldn't unless it was needed of him, and this Ryazaki was at his highest B rank from what Naruto could experience before he had cut him down. "You need a change of clothes." She huffed a bit. This blonde baka had made her worry, but she was joy-filled that he was unharmed and well. The ruckus outside almost made her think otherwise. Naruto just dumbly nodded. She was also starting to sound like Kushina now. It was truly terrifying to witness. "Yeah, but first I want to get the hell out of here. I'm so done with vacations." Naruto chuckled, making Karen giggle slightly as she wiped her tearful eyes. Akari huffed again and bonked him on the head. "Language, there is a child present." Itai. Hi, I'm sorry. The next few hours were spent getting thanked by the villagers. Naruto was getting endless gifts and even some more loot offers for having saved their town. The hot springs owners were sulking and pouting at their ruined establishment, mumbling about how they would explain this to the insurance companies. Before leaving the area, Naruto had gotten rid of the dead bodies and sealed Ryazaki's body inside a scroll. The man had been the son of a village leader and had been rather rude and loathsome like his old man. So, the least he could do as repayment was being cashed in as a bounty. And before they had left Kuni, they had gotten much needed showers and new clothes. Naruto practically had to beg them to let him pay, since they were so dead set on repaying him for saving their village from the monsters that had invaded their home. Little did they know it was actually him that had brought them here by saving his family, but they didn't need to get their good moods ruined by knowing that. Akari was now wearing some black skin-tight pants and a long-sleeved red shirt. Karen was wearing the same as she had been gifted earlier when they had been with Tsunade and Shizune, and Naruto just settled for some plain black and white clothes despite Akari's pleas of him getting some more color into his outfit. Naruto had pouted and asked what was wrong with his clothes, and Akari had just shaken her head at him and stated he looked plainer than a boring wall without any color. A hit to his pride would be an understatement. Not that he had much pride in the first place outside of battle. So here they were after a long week, walking side by side through the woods toward Konoha. Naruto and Akari chatting slightly about more Uzumaki stuff and history, while Karen was getting a piggyback ride from her Aniki. Naruto was pretty deep into the conversation, so he didn't notice Karen pulling and playing slightly with his spiky blonde locks, questioning ever so often how they were so soft while looking so spiky. To say Naruto had an interest in the Uzumaki's use of Fuinjutsu would be an understatement. And so their journey continued, and soon they would be home. Back in Konoha where the Uzumaki should from now on belong. Akari, who had held a small break in her stories, looked up at the blonde and gained the very first grin Naruto had ever seen on her. And it was a teasing one at that. So, tell me more about this Mikoto. Oh, you got to be kidding me. Just in. Community. Forum. More. The Spiraling Empress by Void Acolyte. Anime, Naruto rated M. English, Hurt, Comfort and Romance, Naruto U, Mikoto U. Words. 132k plus. Faves. 2k plus. Follows. 2k plus. Published. December 20, 2019. Updated. April 9, 2023. 586. Chapter 8. Welcome Home. Chapter 8. Welcome Home. Pairing. Naruto x Uchiha Mikoto. This will not be a harem. I post updates regarding the story on my Twitter. So, if you want to be prepared for when chapters come out, I'm always announcing how far I am with the stories in good time. My Twitter. Skyripa1337. I would like to thank a very good friend of mine, Nanami Uzumaki, for helping me write some parts of this chapter. I really appreciated your help. Quick question. Should I tone down the Naruto teasing for a little bit? Is it getting too much? Warning. The main character's age has been adjusted. Gates of Konohagakure no Sato. The rest of their journey toward Konoha had been uneventful. Naruto had carried them through the night with the help of a clone, and now at sunrise, the Uzumaki trio had finally, after a long and tiring trip, arrived at the large gates of Konoha. Akari and Karen were standing still in front of the gates, as Uzushio had been quite big in Akari's eyes, but the walls of Konoha alone was enough to give the word, big, an entirely new meaning to her. The parts of the village that were visible was also adding a lot of meaning to the word. Come on, we're almost there. Naruto chuckled as he led the two redheads into Konoha. It was quite the challenge to keep them focused, as their eyes kept wandering all over the place from the large buildings to the various shinobi everywhere, to even the market district and other kids playing around in the streets.